If your own parents secretly stole your identity, opened tens of thousands of dollars in debt under your name, used your credit to finance your brother's business, then laughed while the rest of your family called you a parasite, would you ever forgive them? Because that's exactly what happened to me. For years, I believed I was simply the difficult daughter, the irresponsible one, the child who always seemed to create problems. At least, that's the story my family told everyone, including me. Then one routine credit check uncovered more than $70,000 in debt I had never borrowed. My name was on every document. My social security number was on every application. My signature was on every page. Except none of those signatures belonged to me. The people responsible weren't strangers. They were the people I'd trusted my entire life. The day I finally packed my belongings and left my parents' house, my younger brother didn't help me carry a single box. Instead, he pulled out his phone. He waited until I was halfway down the driveway, smiling as if he'd been waiting for that moment for years. Then he took my picture. A few minutes later, he uploaded it with one simple caption: "The parasite is officially gone." Within minutes, more than 100 relatives had liked the post. Some laughed, some congratulated my parents. My mother commented that the house already felt cleaner without me. My father replied with a laughing emoji and wrote that peace had finally returned. I stood beside the moving truck, watching every notification appear on my phone. I never replied. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask why the same people who had happily accepted my money for years suddenly wanted the world to believe I'd been living off them. Because while they were celebrating my departure, I had already mailed 3 sets of documents that would destroy every lie they'd spent years creating. Before I tell you how one Facebook post became the biggest mistake my brother ever made, I'd love to know where you're watching from. What time is it where you are right now? And if you've ever had someone betray your trust, especially someone in your own family, leave a comment below. I'm always amazed to see how far these stories travel, and I'd love to hear yours. My name is Olivia Carter, and I'm 25 years old. Looking back now, I realize my family didn't begin stealing from me the day they opened those loans. It started years earlier, so gradually that I never noticed the pattern. Growing up, I was always expected to be the responsible child. If groceries needed to be picked up, I paid. If an electric bill came due while my father was between jobs, somehow my savings disappeared first. Whenever my younger brother Jake wanted something, a gaming computer, a new truck, money for another business idea, my parents always found a way to make it happen. They called it investing in his future. When I needed something, the conversation always sounded different. "We can't afford that right now. You understand better than Jake. You're mature enough to sacrifice." After college, I found a stable job as an accountant. It wasn't glamorous, but I enjoyed the work. I liked numbers because they told the truth. People could manipulate emotions. They could rewrite memories. They could twist conversations until you questioned your own sanity. Numbers didn't do that. They either added up or they didn't. Every month, I transferred money to my parents. Sometimes it covered utilities, sometimes groceries, sometimes property taxes. Whenever I asked exactly where my money was going, my mother would smile and say the same thing. Families don't keep score. So I stopped asking. Not because I trusted the answer, because questioning it always turned into an argument about gratitude. Jake never contributed. He always had another opportunity around the corner, another startup, another investment, another dream my parents insisted would eventually repay everyone. If I expressed even the smallest concern, my father would accuse me of lacking faith in my own brother. Emma, my older sister, rarely got involved. She lived across town with her fiancé and preferred staying out of conflict whenever possible. She wasn't cruel. She was simply absent. Looking back, I understand now that silence can protect the wrong people just as effectively as lies. 3 weeks before I moved out, everything changed. I had just completed the final interview for a senior accounting position. It came with better pay, more responsibility, and enough income that I finally felt ready to leave my parents' house for good. The interviews went beautifully. The hiring manager practically hinted the position was mine. I left the building already browsing apartment listings on my phone. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that belonged entirely to me. 2 days later, the hiring manager called. Her voice sounded careful, professional. She explained that my qualifications were excellent, my references were outstanding. But something unexpected had appeared during the routine financial background check. She wasn't accusing me of wrongdoing. She simply recommended that I review my credit report before accepting any future position requiring financial responsibility. When I hung up, I actually laughed. I assumed it was some minor mistake, maybe an old medical bill, maybe a forgotten student payment. Nothing serious. That confidence lasted less than 15 minutes. As soon as I opened my credit report, I felt the blood drain from my face. 3 accounts, 3 loans, more than $70,000, and every single one of them belonged to me. At least, according to the paperwork. For a few seconds, I honestly thought there had been some kind of mistake. I refreshed the page. Then I refreshed it again. The numbers didn't change. The first account was a credit card, carrying a balance of just over $18,000. The second was a business line of credit worth nearly $32,000. The third was a personal loan for another $22,000. Together, they totaled more than $72,000. I had never applied for any of them. My hands started trembling as I opened the application details. Every account listed my parents' address. Every application used my social security number. Every verification email had been sent to an account my mother created when I was 17. An account I hadn't logged into in years. Then I opened the business loan. The listed beneficiary was Jake's construction company. I stared at the screen so long that my computer eventually went to sleep. No, I whispered to myself. There has to be another explanation. I forced myself to keep reading. The personal loan had been deposited into a checking account jointly owned by my parents. The credit card statements were even worse. There were charges for custom kitchen cabinets, a luxury dining set, weekend trips, expensive restaurants, furniture deliveries, even the anniversary vacation my parents had proudly posted about online 6 months earlier. I remembered that trip. My mother had captioned one of the photos, 30 wonderful years together, blessed beyond words. Apparently, I'd been paying for part of that blessing without ever knowing it. I printed everything, every statement, every application, every payment history. By the time I finished, the stack of paper was nearly 2 inches thick. I sat there until almost midnight, trying to convince myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe identity theft. Maybe someone outside the family had intercepted my information. Maybe, deep down though, I already knew exactly who had done it. The next evening, I waited until Jake left to meet some friends before speaking to my mother. She was folding laundry in the living room. I placed the documents on the coffee table between us. "Can you explain these?" She barely glanced at them. Instead, she calmly folded another towel. "What am I looking at?" accounts in my name. Still no reaction. She sighed the same way parents sigh when a child asks an annoying question. Families move money around all the time, Olivia. I frowned. What does that mean? It means not everything has to be explained. My name is on $72,000 of debt. And? I blanked. And I never opened these accounts. She finally looked at me. There are plenty of things your father and I handle that you don't understand. I understand enough to know someone forged my signature. She smiled. Actually smiled. You've always been dramatic. I slid one of the signature pages closer to her. That's not my signature. It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. No, she said quietly. What matters is that this family stayed afloat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You used my identity. We protected you. I didn't ask to be protected. You didn't need to ask. Every answer made less sense than the one before it. I felt like I wasn't having a conversation. I was listening to someone justify stealing from me as though they'd borrowed a sweater without permission. What exactly did you protect me from? She folded another towel before answering. Adult responsibilities. I actually laughed. A short, bitter laugh I couldn't stop. Adult responsibilities? You've had me paying household bills since I graduated. That's different. How? Because you live here? So, that gives you permission to open loans in my name? Before she could answer, the front door opened. My father walked inside carrying groceries. He looked from me to the paperwork spread across the coffee table. His expression changed instantly. Not fear, not guilt, annoyance. What happened? My mother answered before I could. Olivia found the accounts. Dad slowly placed the grocery bags on the kitchen counter. He walked over, picked up one application, and skimmed it for only a second. Then he looked directly at me. As long as you live under this roof. He paused long enough for the words to settle. You don't question how this family survives. I stared at him in disbelief. I just found $72,000 of debt attached to my name. And we're surviving because of it. He said it so matter-of-factly that I almost questioned whether I'd heard him correctly. You forged my signature. We handled paperwork. You committed fraud. His jaw tightened. Watch your tone. No. It was the first time I had ever said that to him. He wasn't expecting it. Neither was I. The room fell silent. Dad took one slow step toward me. When you own a home someday, if I ever get approved for one, you'll understand what sacrifice looks like. I just lost a promotion because of this. He waved his hand dismissively. You'll get another job. You cost me this one. His face hardened. You have no idea what your mother and I have done for you. I looked around the room. The new hardwood floors, the remodeled kitchen, the expensive appliances they claimed they'd saved years to buy. For the first time, I wondered whose future had actually paid for all of it. I gathered every document back into my folder. Neither of them tried to stop me. Neither apologized. Neither even pretended to regret what they'd done. Instead, my father said something I'll never forget. If you start asking outsiders about family business, don't expect to keep calling this place home. I looked at him for several seconds. Then I quietly nodded. Not because I agreed, because in that moment, I realized I no longer wanted to call that house home at all. That night, I didn't slam any doors, I didn't yell, I didn't pack everything at once. Instead, I did something my family never expected. I became quiet. Not the defeated kind of quiet they'd trained me to be. The dangerous kind. The kind that listens. The kind that observes. The kind that starts collecting evidence. Over the next 6 days, I packed one box at a time. A few clothes after work, books while everyone watched television, kitchen supplies early in the morning before anyone else woke up. I moved so slowly that nobody believed I was actually leaving. Jake laughed every time he saw another box. "She's pulling one of her little dramas," he told my parents one evening while I pretended not to hear. "She'll be back before the month's over." My mother nodded without looking away from her phone. She has no idea how expensive life really is. Dad didn't even join the conversation. He simply smirked. They all believed the outside world would teach me a lesson. None of them realized I'd already learned the most important one. Never leave without protecting yourself first. Every evening after they went to bed, I sat at my laptop copying documents. I downloaded every loan statement, every approval notice, every payment confirmation, every electronic signature, every email connected to those accounts. I even compared timestamps. Patterns began appearing almost immediately. The business line of credit had been approved on a Tuesday morning. According to my work calendar, I had been sitting in a staff meeting nearly 300 miles away at the exact time the verification supposedly occurred. The personal loan listed my father's name as a witness. Only one problem. The date matched a week when I'd been attending a professional accounting conference in Boston. I still had photographs, hotel receipts, conference registration emails, even the boarding passes. Someone had signed legal documents claiming I was physically present while I was in another state. Then I noticed something even stranger. Every verification email had been opened within minutes of being sent, but not from my laptop, not from my phone. The login history showed repeated access from the same internet connection. My parents' house. I didn't need to be an accountant to understand what I was looking at anymore. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't borrowing. It wasn't parents making temporary financial decisions for their daughter. It was organized, deliberate, planned. The following Saturday, while my parents attended a neighborhood barbecue, I stayed home under the excuse of having a headache. The moment their car disappeared down the street, I logged into the email account my mother had created for me years earlier. I hadn't used it since college applications. Hundreds of unread messages filled the inbox. Most were advertisements. Then I searched one word. Approved. Dozens of results appeared. Loan approvals, credit notifications, verification codes, electronic signature confirmations. Some had been deleted from the main inbox but remained in the trash folder. Apparently, my mother had forgotten that deleted emails stayed there for 30 days. I downloaded everything. By the time I finished, I had enough digital evidence to fill an entire folder. Still, I wanted someone smarter than me to tell me what to do next. There was only one person in my family I trusted enough to call. My Aunt Rebecca. Rebecca Hayes was my mother's older sister. For nearly 30 years, she'd worked in banking compliance. If anyone understood financial fraud, it was her. We met the morning after I moved into my apartment. She chose a quiet coffee shop across town. When I walked in carrying my laptop bag, she looked at my face and immediately knew something was terribly wrong. "You look exhausted." "I haven't slept much." She waited until we'd both ordered coffee before asking another question. "What happened?" I slid the folder across the table. "I think my parents stole my identity." Rebecca didn't react immediately. She opened the folder, read the first few pages, then another, then another. Nearly 10 minutes passed before she finally looked up. "Have you confronted them?" I tried. "What did they say?" "My mother called it family money." "And your father?" "He said I wasn't allowed to question how the family survives." Rebecca slowly closed the folder. Her expression had changed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shocked. She had become professional. The same expression I'd seen accountants wear before difficult audits. "Olivia." "Yes?" "Everything I'm about to tell you is important." I nodded. "First," she held up one finger, "do not touch anyone else's devices." "I won't." "Second," another finger, "freeze your credit today." "I already plan to." "Good." "Third," she leaned closer, "download copies of everything you legally have access to." "I already started." "Excellent." She paused before adding the sentence that stayed with me long after that conversation ended. "Evidence wins cases." She looked me directly in the eyes. "Anger doesn't." Those 4 words changed the way I approached everything afterward. Up until then, I'd been thinking like a daughter. Rebecca taught me to start thinking like a witness. Instead of replaying arguments in my head, I began building timelines. Instead of writing emotional notes, I documented dates. Instead of trying to understand why my parents had done this, I focused on proving exactly how they'd done it. That afternoon, I froze my credit with every major bureau. I changed every password connected to my personal accounts. I enabled 2-factor authentication on everything. Then, I created one master timeline. 14 months earlier. The first fraudulent account had been opened. 11 months earlier. The business line funded Jake's company. 8 months earlier, the personal loan appeared. 6 months earlier, my parents remodeled the kitchen. 3 weeks earlier, I lost the promotion. 1 week earlier, I'd confronted my parents. Yesterday, I'd moved out. For the first time, I wasn't looking at isolated events anymore. I was looking at a system. And the more I organized it, the clearer one thing became. Every time I had talked about becoming financially independent, something had happened to keep me exactly where I was. Every single time. The more I studied that timeline, the more uncomfortable I became. What I had originally dismissed as bad luck no longer looked random. Every setback pointed in the same direction. Every obstacle had achieved the exact same outcome. It had kept me living under my parents' roof. 2 years earlier, I'd found an apartment 20 minutes from work. The landlord loved my application. We toured the unit. I even measured the living room to see if my old bookshelf would fit. 3 days later, he called to apologize. He said my debt-to-income ratio was simply too high. At the time, I had been confused. I barely used my credit cards. I drove an old sedan that was completely paid off. I had never missed a payment in my life. When I told my father what had happened, he acted sympathetic. "I told you the city's too expensive." He'd placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Stay here another year. Save your money. "You're not ready yet." I'd thanked him. Actually, thanked him. Now I realized he'd already known why I'd been rejected, because he was one of the people who had created the problem. There had been another opportunity before that, a position with a regional accounting firm. Everything went perfectly until the background check. They chose another candidate. Again. I blamed myself. Again. Every failure I'd spent years accepting suddenly looked manufactured. It wasn't that I wasn't qualified. It wasn't bad timing. Someone had quietly been sabotaging every attempt I made to become independent. My own family. The realization hurt more than the debt itself. Not because of the money, because of the years, the birthdays, the holidays, the conversations where I'd blamed myself while they sat across from me, pretending to comfort me. Rebecca called that evening. "Have you started the identity theft reports?" "I'm about to." "Good. Do I really have enough?" She didn't answer immediately. "You have enough to begin." I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. "Olivia," her voice became firm, "if a stranger opened $70,000 of debt in your name, would you be asking whether you were overreacting?" "No." "Then stop giving your family standards you wouldn't give anyone else." I closed my eyes. She was right. I'd been making excuses simply because the people involved shared my last name. That stopped that night. At exactly 11:42 p.m., I submitted my first identity theft report. The credit card company received copies of my driver's license, proof of residence, specimen signatures, and a sworn statement denying every transaction. At 11:51, I completed the dispute for the business line of credit. This time, I included employment records showing I had never worked for Jake's company. At 11:58, I filed the final report for the personal loan. 3 reports, 3 lenders, 3 investigations beginning before midnight. Then I opened one last email. The recipient wasn't a bank. It was an attorney. Rebecca had recommended a fraud lawyer named Maya Chen. I attached everything: the reports, the statements, the signatures, the timeline, the social media screenshots. Before pressing send, I hesitated. Once that email left my outbox, there would be no pretending this was just another family disagreement. It would become a legal matter. I took one long breath. Then I clicked send. Almost immediately, an automatic reply confirmed my documents had been received. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in nearly a week, I felt something besides fear. Control. There was one final task left. Earlier that evening, I'd prepared an email addressed to my parents, Jake, and Emma. Not emotional, not angry, just facts. It listed every fraudulent account, every balance, every opening date, every known beneficiary. At the bottom, I wrote only 3 sentences. I dispute every account opened in my name. I have preserved all available records. From this point forward, I expect all communication regarding this matter to remain in writing. Nothing else. No insults, no threats, no accusations, just facts. I scheduled the message to send at exactly 6 a.m. Then I shut my laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months, not because the problem had been solved, because, for the first time, I had stopped carrying it alone. At 6:17 the next morning, my phone vibrated. Dad. One message, then another, then another. By 6:30, there were 10. I didn't open any of them. At 6:48, Jake called. I let it ring. He called again and again. By 7 o'clock, my older sister Emma had tried 22 times. At exactly 8:03, my mother left the first voicemail. Her voice sounded nothing like it had the night I'd confronted her. She wasn't calm anymore. She wasn't confident. She sounded terrified. "Olivia, please don't do this. We can explain everything. Just, please give us one chance." I listened to the message twice, not because I believed her, because I noticed something. She never denied opening the accounts. She never claimed the documents were fake. She never once said they belonged to someone else. She only asked for another chance. That told me everything. By 9 o'clock, Maya Chen called. Her voice was clear, direct, and completely free of unnecessary sympathy. "I'm looking at your documents now." I sat straighter. "Do you think I have a case?" "I think you have evidence." She paused. "Now I need to know exactly what you can prove." That sentence instantly told me why Rebecca trusted her. Maya wasn't interested in emotions. She was interested in facts. And for the first time, facts were finally on my side. The next morning, I met Maya Chen at her office. The building overlooked downtown, all steel, glass, and polished stone. Everything about it felt organized, predictable. Unlike the chaos my family had turned my life into. Maya greeted me with a firm handshake instead of sympathy. "I've reviewed everything you sent." She motioned toward the conference table. "Let's build your case." I appreciated that she never asked how I was feeling. Everyone else wanted to discuss emotions. Maya wanted documentation. For the next 2 hours, she went through every page I'd brought. She highlighted dates, circled signatures, compared addresses, cross-referenced timestamps. Occasionally, she'd stop, ask one precise question, make a note, then continue. Finally, she slid 3 documents into a separate stack. "These concern me the most." I leaned forward. The first credit card application. She tapped the page. "It was submitted from the IP address registered to your parents' home internet." She reached for the second document, the business line of credit. Her finger stopped beside the verification log. The confirmation call was completed using your mother's cell phone. Then she opened the personal loan agreement. "This one is particularly serious." She turned the page toward me. "Your father signed as a witness." I nodded slowly. "I saw that." "Where were you on this date?" "I was in Boston." "Can you prove it?" I immediately opened my phone. My company booked the conference. Within seconds, I pulled up hotel confirmations, airline boarding passes, expense reports, even photographs taken during one of the conference sessions. Maya smiled for the first time. "Excellent." She made another note. "One fact rarely wins a fraud case." She stacked the papers neatly. "But several independent facts supporting the same conclusion." She looked directly at me. "Create a pattern." That word again. Pattern. It seemed everyone who understood financial crime kept returning to it. Maya wasn't trying to prove one forged signature. She was proving an organized system. "There are a few more things you need to understand." I listened carefully. "Your family is probably going to stop arguing about documents." "What do you mean?" "They'll start arguing about emotions." I frowned. "They'll tell you your parents sacrificed everything for you. They'll remind you they're family. They'll accuse you of embarrassing them. They'll ask whether money matters more than love. She folded her hands. Because those conversations are easier than explaining forged applications. The realization hit me immediately. She was describing my parents perfectly. They had already started. My mother kept talking about family. Dad kept talking about gratitude. Neither of them had actually explained why $72,000 of debt existed in my name. By the time I left Maya's office, I wasn't carrying hope. I was carrying a strategy. Everything would stay in writing. Everything would be documented. Everything. I had barely reached my car when my phone buzzed. Dad. Instead of calling, he'd finally sent a text. "You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding." I stared at the message. A misunderstanding. Not fraud. Not identity theft. Not forged signatures. Just a misunderstanding. I took a screenshot. Then, another message arrived, this time from Mom. "We only did what responsible parents do." Screenshot. Jake's message came next. "You got my business account frozen over a joke." That one made me stop walking, not because of the insult, because of what he'd accidentally admitted. He didn't ask why the account had been frozen. He didn't deny using it. His first concern was that it had affected his business. Another screenshot. I hadn't replied to a single message. I wasn't going to start now. Then Emma texted. "Can we meet? Just us? Please." I hesitated. Emma had never openly mistreated me. She'd also never defended me. She lived in that comfortable middle ground where doing nothing allowed everyone else to keep doing whatever they wanted. After several minutes, I answered. "Public place. Apartment lobby. 5 o'clock. She replied almost immediately. "Thank you." Emma arrived looking exhausted. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was tied back carelessly. She looked like someone who hadn't slept. The first thing she did wasn't apologize. She handed me a manila folder. "I think you need to see these." Inside were screenshots, not bank records, text messages, family group chats. Except I wasn't in them. My stomach tightened as I began reading. Months earlier, Jake had written, "My business needs another 30 grand. Dad replied almost immediately, "Use Olivia's profile." I read the message twice. "My income is clean." Mom answered next. "She owes this family more than she realizes." Then Jake asked a question that made my hands go cold. "Will the bank contact her?" Mom replied, "I'll handle verification." There was a long pause in the conversation. Then one final message appeared, from Emma. "Does Olivia know about this?" No one answered her. The chat simply continued, as if she had never spoken. I slowly lowered the phone. "You had these the whole time?" Emma shook her head. "I forgot about them." "You forgot?" She looked away. "I believed Mom when she said everything had been handled. You never asked me." "I know." Silence settled between us. Finally, she whispered the words I'd been waiting to hear from someone in my family. "I should have." There it was. Not an excuse. Not a lecture. Not a speech about family. Just accountability. It didn't erase what she'd failed to do, but it was the first honest sentence anyone in my family had spoken since this nightmare began. "I need the originals." "You can have everything." "I won't use screenshots." "I know." She nodded immediately. I'll forward the entire conversation directly to Maya. Before leaving, Emma stopped beside the apartment entrance. There's something else. I waited. The personal loan, she swallowed hard. Part of it went through my wedding account. I frowned. What? Mom and Dad promised to pay the venue deposit. They transferred $12,000 into my account. I asked where it came from. What did they say? They told me it was from a family credit line. She closed her eyes. I believed them. The pieces started fitting together faster than I wanted. They used my identity to help pay for your wedding. Emma nodded. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't know. For the first time since all of this began, I believed someone. After Emma left, I sat alone in my apartment for nearly an hour. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I kept staring at the folder she'd given me, not because I doubted the evidence, because I was trying to understand how many years my life had been quietly redirected without my knowledge. The debt was one thing. The betrayal was something else entirely. I called Maya the following morning. I have more evidence. She listened as I summarized Emma's messages. When I mentioned the family group chat, Maya stopped me. Did Emma agree to provide the originals? Yes. Good. Don't rely on screenshots if you can avoid it. I already told her. Maya sounded pleased. Excellent. Then she asked a question I hadn't expected. Has anyone ever mentioned a trust fund? I blinked. A trust? From your grandparents. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Then a memory surfaced, very faint. When I was a kid, I remember my grandmother saying she'd set something aside for all of us. Maya made a note. Find out what happened to it. I don't even know if it existed. Someone will. The first person I called wasn't my parents. It was Rebecca. She became unusually quiet after hearing the question. Your grandmother, she spoke slowly, searching through old memories, did establish education trusts. For all 3 grandchildren? Yes. What happened to mine? I assumed you received it. I never did. Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she said something that immediately caught my attention. Wait. I think I still have copies. 2 hours later, she arrived carrying an old accordion file that looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. Together, we spread the contents across my dining table. Insurance papers, old tax returns, family photographs. Then, a document with my grandmother's signature. Rebecca carefully unfolded it. I knew I kept this for some reason. Across the top were the words, Family Education Trust Summary. 3 names, Emma Carter, Jake Carter, Olivia Carter. Each grandchild had been assigned an original balance of $60,000. I stared at my own name. I never saw this. Rebecca looked equally confused. You should have. She traced one paragraph with her finger. When the beneficiary turns 21, a full accounting must be provided. I looked up. I never received any accounting. Rebecca slowly shook her head. No, you should have. What about Emma? She received hers. And Jake? He used most of his to help start that first business. The room suddenly felt much smaller. So, I swallowed. I'm the only one who never got mine? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. She already knew. So it seems. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question both of us were thinking. Can we request the records? Rebecca nodded. We absolutely can. Within an hour, Maya had prepared the formal request. If the trust still existed, the administrator would have records. If it had been distributed, there would be records. If money had been withdrawn, there would definitely be records. No matter what had happened, paperwork would exist somewhere. While we waited for the response, Maya suggested one more step. We should offer your family an opportunity to cooperate. You think they'll admit anything? No. She smiled slightly. I think they'll talk. And sometimes, people trying to explain themselves create the best evidence. She proposed a structured meeting, neutral location, public setting. Everything documented, no shouting, no surprises. If they cooperated voluntarily, the lenders would know. If they lied, that mattered too. I agreed. Not because I believed reconciliation was possible, because I wanted every opportunity for the truth to reveal itself. I sent one message to my parents, Jake and Emma. I have documents you need to review. We will meet Friday. Public location. My father replied less than 10 minutes later. If we're discussing family business, it happens in my house. I stared at the message. That house. The same house where every difficult conversation ended with his voice being the loudest. The same house where he could order me into silence simply by standing up. Not anymore. I answered with one sentence. Otherwise, the next meeting will be through attorneys. Nearly 15 minutes passed. Then another message appeared. Friday, 7 o'clock. He didn't like losing control. But he liked lawyers even less. Maya chose a small Italian restaurant on the other side of town. Bright lights, security cameras, families eating dinner all around us. Exactly the kind of place where nobody could comfortably start screaming. She also insisted on something else. You won't be alone. Rebecca agreed to come. She wouldn't sit at our table. Instead, she'd occupy a seat at the bar with a clear view of everything, close enough to witness, far enough not to participate, unless necessary. Friday arrived faster than I expected. I reached the restaurant 30 minutes early. In front of me sat 4 large envelopes. Each one carried a different name. Dad, Mom, Jake, Emma. Each contained only the documents relevant to that person. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just facts. As I waited, memories kept drifting through my mind. I remembered my very first paycheck. I'd been 16. Mom told me the electric bill was overdue. Without hesitation, I'd handed her nearly every dollar. That same week, Jake came home with a brand new laptop. Dad said it was an investment in his future. I remembered working 2 jobs during college, night classes, weekend shifts, barely sleeping. Meanwhile, relatives kept telling me how lucky I was to have parents who let me stay at home. They had no idea I'd been helping pay to keep that home running. One memory after another suddenly made sense. This hadn't started with the loans. The loans were simply the biggest version of a pattern that had existed for years. A pattern built on one lesson. Whenever the family needed something, Olivia would provide it. Whether she agreed didn't seem to matter. The restaurant door opened. Jake walked in first. For the first time since posting that photograph, he didn't look confident. His eyes immediately landed on the 4 envelopes waiting on the table. Then he looked at me.
What is all this?
I calmly folded my hands. The truth. A few seconds later, my parents walked in. I never expected my own parents to look me in the eye and insist that stealing my future was simply another form of love. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller. No one touched the food anymore. No one reached for a glass. The only sound came from the pages resting in front of my father as he stared at the trust documents Rebecca had quietly placed beside his hand. For the first time in my life, he looked uncertain, not angry, not commanding, just uncertain. My mother slowly turned toward her sister. "You've been helping her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "I've been helping the person who was robbed." Silence. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Emma kept her eyes fixed on our parents, refusing to rescue them. Dad finally pushed the trust summary away.
That document doesn't tell the whole story.
"It tells enough," Rebecca replied calmly. "It tells us Olivia had a trust. It tells us she was legally entitled to an accounting. And it tells us she never received one." Dad leaned back. "That money was spent taking care of this family." I looked directly at him. "Then show me where it went." He folded his arms. "Those records are years old." "So you don't have them?" "I'm saying records disappear." Rebecca quietly smiled. "No, they don't."
Not when banks are legally required to keep them.
Dad's jaw tightened. For years, that expression had terrified me. As a little girl, it meant the conversation was over. As an adult sitting across from him with evidence spread across the table, it meant absolutely nothing. Emma finally asked the question none of us had been brave enough to ask before. "Did you use Olivia's trust?" Dad answered too quickly.
It was family money.
"No," Emma corrected. "It was Olivia's money." Another silence. Jake rubbed both hands across his face. "I thought the business loan was legal." I looked at him. "You saw my name on the approval papers." "I thought Dad handled it." "You never asked me." "I trusted them." His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard. I nodded slowly. "And then you called me a parasite." He couldn't answer. That silence said more than any apology could. Mom suddenly reached across the table. "Olivia, I know this looks terrible." "It doesn't look terrible." "It is terrible." She blinked rapidly. "We were trying to keep everyone afloat." I reached into my bag and placed one final document in front of her. The rejection letter from the accounting firm. She unfolded it carefully. Halfway through reading it, her shoulders dropped. "This." They withdrew my promotion. "Because someone destroyed my credit." I tapped the paragraph explaining that my financial background check had raised serious concerns. My salary would have increased by $28,000 a year. I lost that because someone opened $72,000 of debt in my name. Mom stared at the page. Dad looked away. Jake swallowed hard. No one called it a misunderstanding anymore. Dad tried one last time. "You lived in our house. We sacrificed for you." I opened another folder. "I kept records too." I slid a spreadsheet toward him. Every rent payment, every utility transfer, every grocery receipt, every emergency expense, every repair I'd helped cover. 4 years. $51,000. I watched his eyes move down the total. The room became perfectly still. "The Parasite," I said quietly, "paid for your furnace. The Parasite paid your property taxes. The Parasite covered Jake's equipment when his business couldn't. The Parasite kept your lights on." No one laughed, not this time. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted this." I looked at her gently. "Maybe not. But you wanted the benefits. And that's what matters." She began crying openly. "I was trying to keep this family together." "You kept the family together by taking from one person." "That's not keeping a family together." "That's choosing a victim." Emma slowly pushed her chair back. "I need to know one thing." She looked directly at Dad. "Did you forge Olivia's signature?" His hesitation lasted barely 2 seconds. It felt like an eternity. He never answered. He didn't have to. Everyone at the table already knew. Rebecca quietly stood. "I think we're finished here." I nodded. "So do I." I opened Maya Chen's settlement proposal. "This is your opportunity. It isn't revenge. It isn't punishment. It's the last chance you'll have to fix this before the courts decide for you." Dad barely glanced at it. "This is extortion." I calmly shook my head. "No. Extortion asks for something that doesn't belong to you. I'm asking for what already does." Mom reached toward my hand again. "Family problems shouldn't become public." I slowly pulled my hand away. Then I took out a printed copy of Jake's Facebook post. The same photo, the same caption, the same public humiliation. I laid it beside the settlement agreement. "You made this public." "I'm simply correcting the record." No one argued. Because they couldn't. Facts had replaced emotions. Evidence had replaced family mythology. For the first time, my father couldn't end the conversation by raising his voice. My mother couldn't erase documents with tears. Jake couldn't pretend his joke existed separately from the money that built his business. Before I stood to leave, I asked one final question. If someone stole $72,000 using your identity, would you call it a misunderstanding? No one answered. I left the restaurant beside Rebecca. Emma followed a few seconds later. Behind us, I heard my father begin shouting at Jake about the frozen business account. The strange thing about families built on lies is that once the truth arrives, they usually start blaming each other. The 48-hour deadline came and went. No one accepted the settlement. Instead, they tried something far more familiar. They tried to rewrite me. My mother began calling relatives one by one, telling them I had become paranoid after moving out. My father insisted I was trying to destroy the family because they had encouraged me to become independent. Jake, meanwhile, quietly deleted his original Facebook post and replaced it with another. It never mentioned my name. It never mentioned the loans. It never mentioned the forged signatures. Instead, it said, "Be careful of people who weaponize private family issues for attention." Within an hour, messages started arriving. "You only get one family. Money isn't everything. You'll regret this." I ignored every single one. I wasn't interested in winning arguments anymore. I was building a case. While my relatives debated feelings, Maya sent formal preservation notices to my parents and Jake. Every bank statement, Every phone record, every email, every text message, every financial document, every electronic device connected to the disputed accounts. Nothing could be deleted. Nothing could mysteriously disappear. That notice arrived just in time, because the very next morning, someone tried to damage my career. My manager called me into her office. We received an anonymous email. She slid a printed copy across the desk. It accused me of stealing money from my own parents. According to the sender, I had fabricated the identity theft story after wasting years living off my family. I wasn't surprised. I'd expected something like this. Fortunately, I'd prepared for it. The day after filing the fraud reports, I had already informed Human Resources that an identity theft investigation was underway. I had provided the police report number, the lender dispute confirmations, and Maya Chen's contact information. My manager read everything carefully. Then she folded the anonymous letter in half. "This doesn't match the evidence." She dropped it into the shredder beside her desk. "Whoever sent this underestimated how documentation works." As I walked back to my office, my phone buzzed. "Maya, they've started making mistakes." She explained that one of the email headers from the anonymous message had already been traced. The recovery address connected to the account belonged to my father. For years, he had taught me that reputation was everything. Now he was risking his own, trying to destroy mine. Control had become more important than caution. Meanwhile, the lenders continued responding. The credit card company froze every remaining transaction and removed the account from active collections while their fraud investigation continued. The bank financing Jake's business suspended his line of credit and demanded invoices explaining every dollar that had been withdrawn. The personal loan company requested documentation showing why the verification phone number belonged to my mother, and why the funds had been deposited into an account controlled by my parents. Every answer they gave created another question. Every question generated another document. Then Rebecca called. Her voice sounded different, calmer, but heavier. "I think we've found something much bigger." She wasn't talking about the loans. She was talking about my grandmother's trust. Years earlier, Grandma had created education trusts for all 3 grandchildren. Emma received hers when she turned 21. Jake used his to start his business. I had always been told mine disappeared paying for college. I'd believed it because I wanted to. Because believing it was easier than asking questions. Rebecca had requested the trust records. The administrator finally responded. The account hadn't contained $60,000 like we'd originally thought. By the time I turned 21, it had grown to almost $112,000. I stared at the statement without speaking. $112,000. 4 months before my 21st birthday, someone withdrew $84,000. The paperwork claimed it paid educational expenses, except none of the expenses belonged to me. The tuition invoices came from a university I'd never attended. The apartment lease listed an address I'd never lived at. The computer purchase matched equipment listed in Jake's business depreciation records. It wasn't sloppy. It was planned. Even worse, after I turned 21, the remaining balance should have transferred directly into my name. Instead, my father submitted another form. According to that document, I lacked the mental capacity to manage my own finances. I read the sentence 3 times before it fully registered. My own father had legally declared me financially incompetent. Attached to the form was a letter from a licensed therapist, a therapist I'd never met. My hands started shaking, not because of the money, because suddenly every memory made sense. Every time my mother insisted on attending my medical appointments, every time Dad told relatives I wasn't good under pressure, every joke Jake made about me being fragile, every story they told describing me as dependent. It wasn't random. It wasn't family teasing. They were building a paper trail, a reputation that justified keeping control over my money. Their insults had value. Financial value. Maya immediately contacted the therapist's office through formal legal channels. The answer arrived 2 days later. The therapist had never treated me, never evaluated me, never written the letter. Someone had copied the clinic's letterhead from another document entirely. Forgery, not misunderstanding. Forgery. I sat in Maya's office, holding the response. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt empty. Because the hardest part wasn't realizing they'd stolen my money. It was realizing they'd spent years stealing my identity. The quiet daughter, the dependent daughter, the incapable daughter. Every lie had prepared the next one. Every humiliation had become another brick in the prison they'd built around me. And suddenly, I understood something that changed my life forever. They hadn't convinced the world I was weak. They had spent years trying to convince me. Rebecca blamed herself for not seeing it sooner. I should have questioned them years ago, she whispered. They said everything had been handled. I shook my head. No. They forged the records. They created the lies. They're responsible. Not you. She nodded, but I could still see the guilt sitting behind her eyes. Then Emma called. I have something. Her voice was shaking. After our meeting at the restaurant, Mom had texted her. One sentence immediately caught Maya's attention. If Olivia keeps pushing this, we'll lose the house. Another followed only minutes later. You have to convince her she's confused. Emma replied with a single sentence. I'm not lying for you. Then, my mother made the biggest mistake of her life. She answered, the trust money went where this family needed it most. Not, what trust? Not, I don't know what you're talking about. She admitted it, in writing. Emma forwarded the entire conversation directly to Maya. No screenshots, no cropped images, the original message thread. Metadata included. That text became one of the strongest pieces of evidence we possessed. By then, my family's united front had completely collapsed. Jake blamed Dad, Dad blamed Jake's failing business, Mom blamed me. Not one of them blamed the decisions that started everything. That told me all I needed to know. Maya filed the civil complaint 3 days later. It requested restoration of the trust, compensation for the fraudulent debt, damages connected to my lost job opportunity, attorney fees, credit restoration costs, and a permanent injunction preventing anyone in my family from ever using my identity again. Copies went to every lender involved, the trust administrator, their attorneys. We never posted the lawsuit online. We didn't need public drama. The official record was enough. The consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. Jake's largest investor immediately suspended funding. Without access to the disputed business line, his company couldn't pay suppliers. Within a week, deliveries stopped. 2 weeks later, his business partner resigned. My father's employer opened an internal ethics investigation after learning he'd signed a false witness declaration connected to financial documents. He insisted it was a misunderstanding. Human resources disagreed. He was placed on administrative leave while they investigated. My mother quietly resigned from the community finance committee she'd chaired for 6 years. Apparently, people become uncomfortable letting someone oversee public money after discovering accusations involving private money. Funny how that works. The relatives who had eagerly clicked like beneath Jake's Parasite post began quietly removing their reactions. Some deleted comments. Others simply disappeared. Not one of them apologized. Not yet. But certainty had become silence. And silence was already an improvement. For the first time in my life, Mom wasn't controlling the family's story. Facts were. 6 weeks later, mediation began. By then, the lenders had already removed most of the disputed accounts from active collections. My credit score had started climbing again, high enough that the accounting firm reopened my employment file. The job wasn't guaranteed, but the door had opened again. The trust case, however, was only getting started. When I entered Maya's office that morning, I immediately noticed something different. My parents weren't sitting beside Jake. They had separate attorneys. Their alliance had fractured. Emma wasn't seated with any of them. She was there as a cooperating witness, not a defendant. Jake looked exhausted. His expensive suits were gone. His watch had disappeared. Dark circles framed his eyes. His business had officially closed. His biggest investor was suing him. He'd already sold his truck, trying to pay outstanding suppliers. Dad looked older. Mom looked frightened. For the first time, I realized none of them expected to win. They expected me to feel sorry for them. The mediation began with their first proposal. It sounded generous, until Maya finished reading it aloud. They wanted me to accept responsibility for part of the fraudulent credit card balance in exchange for a private family apology. Maya didn't even look at me. She simply pushed the proposal back across the table. Rejected. Their attorney tried again. 15-year repayment schedule. No admission of fraud. No trust restitution. No public correction. Again. I said no. Dad leaned forward. So this is revenge. No. This is accounting. You took something. You return it. You damaged something. You repair it. That's not revenge. That's responsibility. The mediator separated everyone into different rooms. For 7 hours, documents traveled back and forth. Bank records, employment letters, trust statements, phone logs, Emma's text messages, fraud reports. Every single piece fit another piece. Then, Jake's Facebook post entered the discussion. His attorney tried to dismiss it as immature humor. Maya disagreed. She explained exactly why that photograph mattered. The timestamp proved my departure from the address being used to support fraudulent financial accounts. The caption portrayed me as a dependent burden, while my identity was simultaneously funding household expenses and Jake's business. It wasn't proof of every transaction, but it destroyed their central argument. People trying to protect someone don't publicly celebrate humiliating them while privately benefiting from their credit. Late that afternoon, Emma requested permission to speak privately with Jake. They stood in the hallway outside the conference room. I couldn't hear everything, only one sentence. She paid for your future. And you called her a parasite. When Jake returned, he looked defeated. He finally admitted he'd known the business loan carried my name. He insisted Dad told him I'd agreed. Then he admitted something even worse. The photograph hadn't been his own idea. Dad suggested posting it. He wanted relatives to believe I'd abandoned the family. The smear campaign had been coordinated. The room became completely silent. Even their attorneys stopped speaking. Because now, it wasn't just fraud. It was motive. And motive changes everything. After Jake's admission, even the mediator took a long pause before speaking. No one rushed to fill the silence. There was nothing left to explain. Only consequences. My parents' attorney requested a private conference. For nearly an hour, the four of them remained behind closed doors, while Maya and I reviewed the latest lender findings. She never celebrated. She never smiled. She simply highlighted another paragraph. They're running out of options. When my family finally returned, they looked different. Not defeated, resigned. Dad no longer argued that the accounts had been temporary. Mom no longer insisted everything had been done out of love. Jake no longer blamed anyone else. For the first time, they were negotiating reality instead of fiction. Their attorneys slid a revised proposal across the table. Maya read it carefully before handing it to me. The vacation cabin would be sold. Dad's retirement investment would be liquidated. The proceeds would restore the trust principal, accumulated growth, and every documented loss connected to the fraudulent accounts. Every lender would receive restitution directly from my parents and Jake. The fraudulent debts would be permanently removed from my credit history. My legal fees would be paid. Jake would surrender the remaining assets from his company and repay every dollar that investigators traced back to his business. Most importantly, all three of them would sign sworn statements confirming that I had never authorized a single account opened in my name. No vague language, no careful wording, no misunderstandings. Just the truth. There was only one issue still dividing us: the public correction. My mother stared at that paragraph as though it hurt more than every financial demand combined. Please, not this. People don't need to know. I looked at her calmly. They already know your version. They deserve mine. Dad rubbed his forehead. This will ruin us. I slowly pulled a copy of Jake's original Facebook post from my folder. The photograph, the caption, the laughing emoji, Mom's comment. 123 relatives, thousands of impressions. You weren't worried about privacy then. No one answered. Maya explained the reasoning. The defamatory statement was public. The correction must be equally public. Jake would repost the same photograph, the same audience, the same profile. Only this time, the truth would be attached to it. Mom closed her eyes. They'll never look at us the same again. I answered quietly. They stopped looking at me the same because of your lies. Neither of us spoke again for several seconds. Dad finally looked directly at me. What would it take for you to forgive us? The question surprised everyone. Even Maya looked up. I thought about it carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't part of this agreement. You can't negotiate it. You can't buy it. You can't earn it this afternoon. What I need is my life back. My credit, my name, my future, and the right to decide who gets access to me. The mediator wrote something down. Dad lowered his head. At 8:47 that evening, they signed, one by one. Dad first, Mom second, Jake last. Each signature carried more honesty than every conversation we'd had over the previous decade. The civil settlement was complete. The criminal and regulatory investigations would continue independently. That decision belonged to the authorities, not me. As we gathered our papers, Jake approached me in the lobby. For a moment, he looked like the older brother I used to admire as a little girl. Then he spoke. I lost everything. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I answered, no. You lost something that was built using my name. That's very different. I almost lost my career, my apartment, my trust, my reputation, and I didn't even know why. You knew. You just didn't care. His shoulders dropped. For once, he had nothing clever to say. I walked out beside Maya and Rebecca. The evening air felt strangely peaceful. There was no celebration, no victory, no dramatic music, just relief. Real relief. For years, I'd thought revenge meant making someone suffer the way they made you suffer. I was wrong. Real justice isn't watching someone fall. It's refusing to keep holding them up. That night, for the first time in my life, I walked away knowing that the locked door behind me could only be opened by one person. Me. 2 days later, Jake made the post. He used the exact same photograph, the one of me carrying the last box down the driveway, the one he'd been so proud of. Only this time, the caption was different. I called my sister a parasite while she was paying household expenses, and while financial accounts opened without her permission were being used to support both our family and my business. What I posted about her was false. It was cruel. And she deserved better. Below his statement, Mom added her own comment. Olivia did not abandon this family. I used her personal information without her consent. I deeply regret my actions. Dad's response was the shortest. The correction above is accurate. That was it. No excuses, no explanations, no references to sacrifice. Just 3 sentences that should have been written years earlier. The correction never spread as quickly as the original insult. It never does. But it reached enough people. Many of the same 123 relatives who had laughed at my expense saw the truth. Some sent private apologies. Others claimed they'd always suspected there was more to the story. I didn't argue with either group. I didn't need validation anymore. Their opinions had stopped determining my worth the day I walked out of that house. 3 months later, the last fraudulent account disappeared from my credit report. When I refreshed the screen, I stared at it for almost a full minute. For the first time in over a year, my financial history actually belonged to me. The accounting firm called that same week. We'd like to reinstate your offer. I smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. This time, I negotiated. I accepted the position with the original salary increase they'd promised before the background check. $28,000 more a year. A promotion. A management track. The future I'd nearly lost because someone else wanted to borrow my identity. The restored trust funds were transferred into a new investment account, one controlled by only one person. Me. I paid the remaining legal expenses, set aside a down payment for a modest apartment, invested the rest. For the first time, my money wasn't solving someone else's emergency. It was building my own future. Emma and I started talking again, slowly, carefully. She returned every dollar connected to the wedding funds that had passed through the fraudulent loan. She postponed the expensive venue, She and her fiancé attended financial counseling together. She never once asked me to forget what happened. She simply stopped making excuses for it. That mattered more than any apology. Rebecca remained my closest ally. Whenever I doubted myself, she reminded me of something I'd forgotten. You didn't win because you had better evidence. You won because you finally believed your own evidence. She was right. The hardest part had never been collecting documents. It had been trusting myself enough to act on them. During the 1-year no-contact period, my parents sent several emails through the address established in the settlement. Some sounded sincere. Others still contained little explanations hidden inside their apologies. We only wanted to help. We were under pressure. We made mistakes. I read each message only when I felt emotionally ready. Sometimes weeks passed before I opened one. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would never mean giving them access to my finances again, or my documents, or my future. Boundaries aren't punishments, they're security systems. Jake eventually found another job, a regular salaried position. His business was gone. His investors sued. His truck had been sold months earlier. One afternoon, he asked if we could meet for coffee. Curiosity won. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Why didn't you fight back under the Facebook post?" I smiled. "Because arguing in the comments would have helped you." He frowned. "I don't understand." If I had defended myself online, everyone would have focused on opinions. I wanted them to focus on evidence. The comments section would have disappeared in a week. The documents are permanent. He looked down at his coffee. I really thought it was just a joke. No, you thought humiliation had no cost. He nodded slowly. For the first time, I believed he understood the difference. Maybe not completely, but enough. Sometimes that's all growth looks like. That photograph never disappeared from my life. It became Exhibit A in a legal case, the timestamp connecting my departure to the fraud investigation. The image attached to the public correction. The picture my attorney referenced more than once during mediation. Jake wanted relatives to watch me leave with a moving box. Instead, they watched the truth walk out behind me. I used to think revenge meant making someone experience exactly what they'd done to me. Now I know better. The strongest revenge isn't destruction. It's freedom. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped protecting a system that depended on sacrificing me. If someone calls you selfish the moment you establish a boundary, ask yourself one question. Who benefited from your silence? My family mistook my patience for permission. They believed kindness meant endless access. They believed silence meant agreement. The night Jake posted that photograph, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I documented. I reported. And I kept walking. By sunrise, they wanted another chance. The truth is, I'd already given them years. The only chance that mattered after that was the one I finally gave myself. Months passed. Life slowly became quieter. Not because the damage disappeared, but because it finally stopped growing. I settled into my new position at the accounting firm. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid every time my phone rang. I wasn't waiting for another collection notice, another rejection letter, another crisis I didn't understand. My paycheck belonged to me. My credit belonged to me. My future belonged to me. It was an unfamiliar feeling. One Saturday afternoon, Rebecca stopped by my apartment, carrying 2 cardboard boxes. I found these while cleaning out my attic. Inside were old photo albums, school certificates, birthday cards, drawings I'd made as a child. At the bottom of the second box sat a faded envelope addressed in my grandmother's handwriting. Rebecca frowned. I don't remember seeing this before. I carefully opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten letter. My sweet Olivia, if you're reading this, you're finally old enough to understand something I learned too late. Money isn't the most valuable thing you'll ever inherit. Your name is. Protect it. There will always be people who believe kindness means ownership. Don't let anyone convince you that love requires surrendering yourself. The people who truly love you will never need you to disappear so they can shine. Love always, Grandma. I read the letter twice before I could continue. Then I quietly folded it and placed it back inside the envelope. For years, I'd wondered what my grandmother would have thought if she'd known what happened. Now I had my answer. Several weeks later, Emma invited me to lunch. Not because she wanted forgiveness, because she wanted honesty. She admitted something I'd never expected to hear. I wasn't afraid of Mom and Dad. I was afraid of becoming the next target. That sentence stayed with me because it explained so much. Families built on manipulation rarely have only one victim. They simply have one person carrying most of the weight. Emma hadn't created the system, but she'd benefited from staying quiet. Now, she was finally choosing something different. We weren't sisters again overnight. Trust doesn't work that way. But for the first time, we were building something honest instead of pretending something broken was healthy. Almost a year after I moved out, Maya called. The last regulatory review is complete. The agencies accepted the settlement documentation. The investigations are officially closed. I thanked her, then sat quietly in my office after hanging up. Closed. One simple word. It felt strangely emotional, not because every wound had healed, but because the chapter had finally ended. That evening, I drove past my childhood house for the first time. Not intentionally. Traffic simply routed me through the neighborhood. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was fading. The flower beds Mom used to obsess over were overgrown. For years, I'd believed that house contained my entire life. Now, it looked like someone else's memory. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving. Months later, Jake sent one final email. No requests, no excuses. Just one sentence. I hope one day I become someone Grandma would have been proud of. I stared at it for a long time. Then I archived it. Not because I had forgiven him, but because I no longer needed to carry it. People often ask whether justice brought me peace. The answer is, not immediately. Justice restored my finances. It restored my name. It restored my future. Peace came later. Peace arrived the first morning I woke up and realized I wasn't thinking about proving anything to anyone anymore. I wasn't trying to convince relatives. I wasn't trying to change my parents. I wasn't trying to rescue my brother. I was simply living. And that was something no lawsuit could ever give me. Looking back now, I understand why Jake's photograph mattered so much. He believed it captured the moment I lost everything. He couldn't have been more wrong. That picture captured the exact moment I stopped losing myself. The moving boxes weren't carrying away my life. They were carrying me toward it. My parents thought obedience made a good daughter. Jake thought silence made an easy target. For years, I believed them. Until I discovered one simple truth. The strongest people aren't the ones who endure every betrayal. They're the ones who finally decide they don't have to. So, if someone in your life calls you selfish for protecting your own future, ask yourself this. Would they still be angry if your boundary didn't cost them anything? Sometimes the people who accuse you of abandoning them are really upset because you stopped allowing them to use you. And those are two very different things. I didn't walk away because I hated my family. I walked away because I finally loved myself enough to stop financing my own destruction. That was never revenge. It was freedom. And freedom was worth every single box I carried down that driveway.